Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your Ultimate Lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continuously unexpected. So uncivilized.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithling.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are joined by a returning guest for this episode. You know him from the Rebel Base Card and the Long Take Review podcast. Please welcome back to Podcast Stardust, Greg Cass. Greg, how you doing?
Oh, I actually wanted to be called Eye of the Storm tonight. No,
Yeah.
I'm great, Dennis.
From Ion Cannon to...
Thank you for having me back.
I love that.
Well, if Greg's hint didn't tip you off, we're going to be discussing the High Republic in general in this episode. But before we get into that, Jay, I want to remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
Wow, I don't have a witty comeback for that. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X, conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
And Greg, where can everyone find you?
People can find me primarily on Instagram and Threads at Ion Cannon. That's EYEONCANON.
Yeah, still one of the best social media handles for really the Star Wars. I love it. Okay. The dish is lying, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. Going to pull back the curtain a little bit. We're recording this in early to mid-April, ahead of my early summer travel. So by the time this one comes out, some things may be out of date, as you probably told from an episode last week. Hey, it is what it is. But we didn't want to leave anybody without some content while I am gone. But yeah, we're going to talk about the High Republic in general. We are in the we just completed the first wave of Phase 3. And this has been going on now since 2020 was when this all started with, we're in the middle of COVID. Mm-hmm. Actually, I guess they pushed it back a little bit because it was supposed to come out in August of that year. So since 2021, we've been enjoying this content. Greg, Jay, and I have talked about it quite a bit on past shows, but overall, what is your take on the High Republic?
Oh, I know you talked about it a lot because I am always sure to save those episodes and listen to every single one of those all the way through. I am a huge High Republic fan. So I am. I started tracking this back when it was called Project Luminous, and they were giving us those tantalizing hints. And then I was very, very fortunate. I am not a social media influencer of the level who gets review copies, but I have a wife who works at a bookstore and was past the first YA and the first middle grade book early. So I'm a High Republic fan from about October of 2020 ahead of release, and felt very special in that limited way to steal my wife's clout and enjoy that. And I think it's hard to say this, with total confidence, but I think I've read everything as the High Republic has come along. Wow. I really try to stay up to date on review or on release dates and grab thing as it comes. So I am not at all going to pretend to be objective here. I'm very much a High Republic fan.
That's awesome. That's
Nothing wrong
fantastic.
with that. Yes, and we were pointing out before we started recording that, of course, the listeners can't see this, but you have a Stellan Geos lightsaber in the background there as we are recording.
Oh, I'm so pleased with that, that they created it, and, I try to limit my collecting these days, especially the high-end items, but I do think there's a way in which you need to vote with your money, and I wanted to
Right.
vote I want more High Republic, treasures and collectibles, so I snatched that right up. We're in June, so I think it's, outside of when I can be held accountable to this, but I definitely had my class do group work at noon on that particular day, and quickly on my laptop reserved my Stellan Geo's lightsaber, and then got back to teaching a little later in the class period.
Oh, I've never done anything like that as a teacher.
Never. Yeah.
Just
Okay.
me.
Yeah, I haven't blocked off entire segments of my day so that I don't get called into meetings for that. Okay. So, what is it about the High Republic that you think that they're doing well that makes you appreciate it so? Start with you, Greg, and then I'll get your input on that, Jay.
So I said in my last appearance that I am a child of the dark times, which means for me, the books have always been very central to my fandom because I came up in between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. So I really became a fan around like 95, 96, and there were books. I mean, there were VHS tapes and old action figures in giant bins for $0.25 a pop at flea markets, but there wasn't new stuff except for the books. And so I started then being in love with the books, and nothing has kind of reawakened that passion in me like the High Republic has. And to me, it benefits so much from just being totally different, that we are outside of the familiar confines of the timeline of events. We get a few characters who are familiar sprinkled throughout, but never really, characters we don't know their story, and that's really beautiful and freeing in Star Wars, as much as I love all the storytelling that happens. And I year or so ago, or maybe 6 months ago, I wrote a blog entry about what live action Star Wars should learn from the High Republic. And my first item on the list was, be weird. Don't be afraid to get a little weird, and let Star Wars be something new and different. And this series with the Nile, with the Drengir, and so many with Geode, so many other examples hasn't been afraid to do something different and unfamiliar in ways that I think are thrilling for me as a Star Wars fan, of the last 30 years or so.
Yeah, I would definitely echo a lot of what you just said as well, Greg. And, for me too, I know, as you mentioned, when this first came out as Project Luminous, it was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. But it wasn't really on my radar all that much until, we really started getting into it and Dennis and I really started talking about it and then started seeing just the breadth and depth of all of these authors and just the buildup of all of the meetings that they had together and all of the creative kind of sketchbooks, if you will, of the way that they wanted to do things. And I thought, okay, this is kind of in some ways like expanded universe slash legends, in which we had all of these different authors that were bringing us stories from different aspects of different characters. And but the thing about the High Republic that I think really does a nice job that Legends does not is that it's a lot more cohesive, and that you see so much more of this harmony across the storytelling. And whereas with Legends slash expanded universe, the everything was great. I mean, Dennis and I both are just huge Legends fans, and one of my very favorite characters, or my favorite character ever, Tahiri Vela, is from Legends. So, I can't say enough about how much I love it. But, the High Republic is different in that it's just, like I said, it's just so much more cohesive, and it's something that you can follow through the books and the comics. And the audio dramas and, and now that we've got the Acolyte too, it's just kind of a gift that keeps on giving, and it's such a really cool era of Star Wars. And like you, Greg, it's one of those things where you just have to let it in, and it's fresh, and it's different, but it still feels like home. And and Dennis and I know we're just loving every single adventure that we're able to cover, and it's just, I get so excited. I mean, you can tell I just love the High Republic. I just think it's fantastic.
Yeah. I have to echo a lot of the things that you both said. And if I didn't say it before, I'm going to say it now. We're going to be spoiling stuff that happens in the High Republic. So listen to this at your own risk. Probably should have said that earlier. Fortunately, we haven't really given away too many details. Yeah, for me, I think one of the things I like about it is that this is an era, and I like what you said, Greg, about the live action Star Wars can learn something from this. It's not saturated. So much of that time period between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, those few years right before A New Hope now, are so saturated with stories that they have to be so careful. And if they want to tell us a story about Han Solo, well, we know Han's going to live to the end, and those type of things, and where there are consequences for these characters that we see in the High Republic, and they've not been shy about killing some of them off. So that tension is always there. And it's part of the reason why I wanted them to go beyond the Rise of Skywalker with some of the storytelling, is get us into another area or where we don't know that everyone's going to make it out of this. I mean, you can generally suspect that some key characters are going to survive to the end of a book or a comic or whatever the case may be. But at least with this, don't get attached, because the fallen star rolls around and kills a whole bunch of your favorite characters, or at least
Yeah.
makes you think they're dead over the timeline here. So with that having been said, is there anything that you think the High Republic could be doing better right now?
I think they are starting to course correct for this, but I think the pacing of the release has turned off a lot of readers, and
Mhm.
that's just because people are feeling overwhelmed, and that's totally fair. And again, because of my wife's line of work, I get a deep discount on every book I buy, so I don't necessarily worry about that the way other fans have to. But it's a huge investment, and I think the authors themselves have been saying, use your libraries. You don't have to buy every single thing that comes out, and you don't have to read it all. But I think because it's so beloved and all encompassing, everybody wants to consume it all, and it can get overwhelming. I have two really good friends here in town, and all three of us started reading everything together in phase one, and then they both fell off in phase two. And I think the change of the timeline threw them, and they didn't like the earlier time period as much, but also had just kind of gotten some fatigue, and so gave up. Now, Michael Sieglin said, and we've already seen for the first wave, that they're slowing down wave three a little bit. They're stretching it out. So I think that's my biggest complaint. Even though I've kept up with it, it has felt like a lot at times. And somebody asked me in the lead up to Acolyte, like, "Oh, what happened in this with Vestra? Like, what should I know about her?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know if I remember, how to do that." And actually, I think I shared on social media when I started new Defy the Storm, I really struggled with about the first third of that book because I couldn't keep the characters straight, because I had probably too much through Mission to Disaster, which I think is the last time the majority of those characters appeared. So the best advice I have, and maybe this speaks to a weakness, is you got to get the High Republic character encyclopedia and have it right next to you when you're reading, because it's really handy to be able to look up and verify who those characters are.
Yeah, I would echo that too. There is a lot. And I know I have some friends that, they really didn't know that the High Republic even existed. And then when I start talking about it and gushing about it and that type of thing, and then they say, "Oh, where can I find some of these things?" And then they think, "Oh my gosh, like there's so much." So it can definitely be overwhelming. But one thing I know that, Dennis, I know I can speak for you in this, is that there's a lot of places that you can jump in and jump out of, and you don't have to feel like you have to consume everything to get, enjoyment out of the High Republic and out of the stories and out of these characters and that type of thing. So, but yeah, I I find myself just jumping onto Wikipedia a lot, to kind of verify who is that again? And I'm very, very grateful to have a co-host with an eidetic memory because he I tell him he is my saving grace because Dennis always reminds me of the people, places, and things that just kind of go in one ear and out the other sometimes for me. And so I'm very thankful that Dennis keeps my brain pan straight all the time.
Well, thank you. You flatter me here.
It's true.
Well, okay, but yeah, part of that is as Star Wars fans, we've been getting trained so much, especially lately, that they mention an alien name, and if it doesn't jump out to you, you're absolutely right, Jay. You go to Wikipedia, you put it in there, and you're like, "Oh yeah, that was that third alien to the right in the cantina." And
Yeah.
Solo Star Wars. Sure, got it, got it. As for me, I guess my criticisms of the High Republic of this is that, and I would not have thought to put it the way that you did, Greg, which is that the throttle was crazy on this, and I did not realize exactly how much stuff had put out until I sat down here and tried to list everything that came out, and I was like, wow, I thought I was pretty complete on this, but I found a number of, especially like the High Republic Adventure type stuff that I wasn't even aware existed in a few cases. And I'm like, well, okay. And then I noticed, if you can see my office right now, I've got a day bed that's got a bunch of stuff that I haven't gotten around to putting on my shelves yet. And some of that are like comics and a few things that, George Mann's recent collection, stuff like that. I didn't even know, I forgot that I had pre-ordered that until it showed up on my doorstep last week. That was a big surprise. Like, I didn't even know, I didn't even remember it existed. And there it was. I think I
Yeah.
sent you a text, Jay, about that.
You did. And it was like,
And
"Oh, wow."
right. And so I am a completist, and I know a lot of Star Wars fans are, and they want to know things. This was a big problem when they got rid of Legends. This was that we went from being experts to having our knowledge base reset on things like
Right.
that, and that was one of the things that bothered me the most. And now, like this realization I had today is like, as I'm reading through something like Defy the Storm, and there's a character, and it's like, oh, am I supposed to know this person or not? And then you have to take the time out to go and find it, and then you find there was a source that you forgot about. And that's the other thing with the amount that they've released. I was looking at my bookshelves, my High Republic collections right above my computer that we're recording this on. And I pulled some of the books off and I was like, I know the characters are on the cover. I can't remember what they did in this one. I
Yeah.
think it's what you're alluding to, Greg. And, some of the
Yeah.
big ones, like especially the adult novels I get, I can remember because those are the broad strokes. Okay. So I'm kind of repeating what you all said there. The other thing is that I feel like the series could do a better job. They don't always identify a villain in the books. And by that, I mean, we got Marcion Rowe, but Defy the Storm, he showed up in like 3 pages of that book. And then the Nile were the general villain, but there wasn't any one particular one of them that was around to be the antagonist for our heroes over the course of that story. And don't get me wrong, I enjoyed Defy the Storm, but I feel like if they had more of a focus character to be working against or working against them, that could have brought us a tighter narrative overall. And they've done that a couple times over the course of the storytelling. So, I think of Fallen Star. There were some smaller villains in there, but again, it was the Nile in general, kind of in the background, sabotaging that, as opposed to, Martian Rowe is some version of the Emperor, Darth Vader, whatever, but he's a lot of times kind of twirling his mustache in the background. And then you get a case of him being written by Charles Soule in that 2-part comic series, Eye of the Storm, I think it was what it's called, and he's front and center and he's amazing. Give me more of that. So that, I guess, is my criticism of the High Republic. And I mean, if that's as bad as it gets, it's not particularly bad. So, so is there a particular story that has really stood out to you from the High Republic so far, that as a favorite one that you point to and say, this is why I enjoy it so much?
I have to be honest, even if I'm a little basic, and I actually now count this as my favorite book in current canon. That when somebody who's curious about starting Star Wars books often asks that question, I him to Light of the Jedi, which I think is just phenomenal. And I'm a huge fan of Charles Soule, kind of in the lead up to that book, but especially since that book. And I know I believe, Dennis, at least you followed Charles Soule over to the Endless Voyage as well, like I did, and now he's got Chronicles of the Lazarine, which we were a part of the Kickstarter for, and I just really have come to value how he tells stories. At this moment, I'm not wishing for the end of the High Republic, but I'm so excited that he gets the kind of last word on the series with last adult novel. So Light of the Jedi is the one I would point to, and the reason is because the spirit of the moment of the initiative was really like, let's rewind the clock from Phantom Menace to show the Jedi before they were in their kind of fallen state. And I thought Light of the Jedi was so good at that. And the moment when, as the tragedy starts to unfold over Hetzel, and the Jedi show up, and everything is great. And, everybody kind of calms as the Jedi take over, and they show kind of the good deeds. And there's a moment later in that book where Avar kind of levitates and becomes the channel through which force powers flow, and cools off and draws rain, I believe, to cool off the droids. And all of that just had this sense of wonder I hadn't felt about the Jedi probably since the prequels. There's some wonderful moments with Jedi, but that kind of purity, like, I'm a huge fan of Last Jedi, and what Luke did was like one of the most heroic things ever, and really impressive force power, but it had that taint of kind of gray or darkness to it, whereas this was just like pure light and goodness, and it was really inspiring to see in that one. I could list like 10 more favorites. I'll focus on that one as the one that I really love best of all.
It's hard to pick just one. How about
It
you, Jay?
is. Yeah, well said, Greg. Yeah, for me, of course, I mean, Light of the Jedi booted it all off. And you're right, it really did kind of bring you back to that sort of wide-eyed wonder of what the Jedi really are, and like in this golden age. And honestly, it's, for me, it's kind of the same way with the movies. It honestly depends on what kind of a mood I'm in, but a lot of times I think about it in, what book or books would I go back to read again, or what books do I think about, when I think High Republic, like what are some of the first things that come to mind? And for me, honestly, like Into the Dark was one of the big ones for me. I loved the whole idea of the Drangir, and then being introduced to the vessel and Liax Jassy and all of these kind of ragtag sort of people, and everything that they were doing at that time. And then I love Cataclysm because, I love me some Axel Greylark. And these are just some amazing characters that, just kind of run the gamut of just all types of characters. And and then of course there's Eye of Darkness from this last phase that is just absolutely phenomenal. And so yeah, so those are just a few. Path of Vengeance is another one that comes to mind right away. Fallen Star is an amazing one. So yeah, so just like you, Greg, I could go on and gush about all of these, but those are the top ones for me that come to mind. But Dennis, what about you? I have a feeling I know what your number one is, but
Number one would have been Light of the Jedi.
yeah, that's what I figured.
Yeah, I'm just like Greg. I'm a huge Charles Soule fan. It started with his work on Star Wars comics, especially his run on Darth Vader, which is probably my favorite 25 issues of Star Wars comics when it comes down to it. But since we talked about that, I'm going to highlight one of the audio dramas, and that was what Kevin Scott did with Tempest Runner.
Good point.
Great one.
As much as I like Light of the Jedi, I wasn't particularly a big fan of Lorna D in that book. However, Cavan turned her into a tour de force in Tempest Runner, really gave that character some depth, added some sympathy for High Republic fans for her, but cemented her as a villain, an anti-hero at the end, and we're kind of seeing an evolution of that character again in phase 3 of the High Republic. But I've listened to that, I think 3 times now, and read the script and really, really enjoyed that one. I think it was a fantastic bit of work. I love Charles Soule, and again, that book, and I like everything he's done, but Kevin Scott has really stood out for me when it comes to the High Republic, because he's done books, he's done the audio drama, he's done comics. His work with Marvel on the ongoing series for each one of the phases is some excellent storytelling. He comes up with some fantastic characters and breathes life. Keith Trennis, what he's done with her and Master Skier is just I can't wait to pick up each one of those issues every month when those come out and see what's happened with them.
Oh yeah, the comics are just a treasure trove, and I'm so thankful because for me, comics are always something that I want to indulge in, that I have the desire to do, but it's mainly just because of Dennis and I doing this podcast that I've actually really immersed myself into them, and there are such amazing, amazing stories in those comics that I'm so glad that I didn't miss and that we were actually able to cover.
Mm-hmm. So,
Another thing on my list of what live action should learn, and it's just you've hit on it, is I said they should trust their creators, because that's what's been so beautiful about High Republic. When you talk about Charles or Cavan or Justina or Claudia, they really let these creatives seemingly drive the storytelling, and they've recruited such fantastic talents, and all of those creators and the next generation as well, Alyssa Wong and Zoraida Cordova and on and on. I know I'm leaving some out, but there's so many now. But they are all just fantastically kind people, and they seem so genuinely warmed by the response their work has gotten. A top memory from Celebration Anaheim is I was in the room for the High Republic panel, and you could just tell they had no representation of what these books meant to people, and that they've given so much back to the fandom just means a lot. And so I think we probably all could list which ones we prefer, and maybe one or two that don't work as well for us, but they all just give their all to this initiative, and I'm so impressed by all the storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's well said. While there's a few of these I don't care for as much as the others, every one of these authors has written something that I've liked in the
Mm-hmm.
High Republic that I think has really been an excellent contribution. So you mentioned this earlier, Greg. They kind of went the unusual route of jumping back 100 years to give us phase 2 of the High Republic, which introduced some ideas that we would not fully appreciate until we got really to the end of that phase and kind of see how it started to impact phase 3. And you mentioned your friends kind of had a hard time grasping that. Well, what did you think about phase 2 and that decision to go backwards in time?
I did feel the impatience that I think a lot of fans felt, which is like, but I really want to know what's happening with these characters I've grown attached to, and it was so frustrating to say, oh, it's going to be a couple years until we get back to those stories. Though in hindsight, it's now like it was just a blip, and we're right back into phase 3, getting those answers now. I really enjoyed how the galaxy was so much rougher in phase 2, that we had hyperspace prospectors, and that, this has been present in the first and third phase storytelling, but it's like it was even earlier, and they made that known. I played the Knights of the Old Republic game when it came out. I love that game. I'm not speaking ill of it, but they were like, oh, it's 5,000 years before A New Hope, but the technology is like 10 years older. It really didn't seem like that much had changed. So I like that the High Republic has leaned into the, like, let's really get a history that matters and a change in that period. I mean, I co-sign what Jay said about Axel Greylark is just a fantastic character and made those books a lot of fun. But I put down, I called it the path duology, path of deception and path of vengeance on my short list for favorites, because I really love what they did with the path of the open hand. And I think listeners may have more answers than we do, but there seems to be a connection to the acolyte that was planted there in some regard. From where we sit right now, it just seems like the fact that there's a mother character can't just be a coincidence. So I'm really excited to see them pick up that storytelling. And Jay also praised Eye of Darkness. I love that Eye of Darkness picked up some of those strands from phase 2 and made it clear that that storytelling mattered, and if you kind of stuck with it, you'll see benefits to what you're reading now.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was hard for I think a lot of us that just really, like you said, Greg, got just so attached to those characters, and then to be like, "Oh, but wait, we have to go back like 100 years? What?" But and it was actually a very bold move on their part to take that kind of leap of faith to say, just wait, trust the process. You'll see why. And, and sure enough, why did we ever, doubt it kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember that episode of the High Republic show with Christina Ariel, and they had the authors as they were winding up phase one, and they were getting ready to get into phase two, and at the end they dropped that bomb that they were going 100 years into the past. It was just like, wait, whoa, hold on, I you just crashed Starlight Beacon and you killed Stellan Gios. Where's Buryaga? You had Master Skier's missing, buckets of blood. All these characters are
Yeah.
unaccounted for, and now I'm going to have to wait a year, like you're saying, Greg. It's so okay, and so I was a little reluctant to get into phase two, but it didn't take me any time at all. We got to meet Vildar Mac in the comics, and we got to meet so many other Jedi that were there. I don't remember them as well because again they were just kind of I remember Marta Rowe and her cousin Yana Rowe and the likes and stuff like that, but they were kind of elements to tell the story of the characters we met in phase one that were going to continue in phase three. And so I love that storytelling. I thought the audio drama that George Mann did for the Battle of Jeddah was fantastic in there. I
Mhm.
like Ziri and Fantu
Oh,
from
yeah.
was it Iram and Iriadu? Those worlds that have been at war. I thought, as you also allude to, Greg, the integration of the next generation of authors was what, and I was nervous about that going in that phase. Like we had such a
Mm.
good thing going with phase one. Do we really need to bring in more people? But they did good work. Especially calling out George Mann, Lydia Kang, Zoraida Cordova did good work as well. There's so many of these authors here that, and it's been fun tracking the progress through all of that. And hey, it was just awesome to get back to Jeddah again. It was such a
Yeah.
cool looking little world that we got to see in Rogue One, and it's shown up here in places throughout since since Rogue One, but they really got to spend some time on it in phase two and kind of see all these different force sects that were there in the holy city and how they had that council going of all these different types of force users and how they were also just always like one moment away from being at each other's throats and just for something to get called to calm them down at the end there in the Temple of Kyber and stuff. So that was a fun addition for me. Okay, well, we're starting to run out of time, so let's do a few other quick topics here. Favorite Jedi from the High Republic? That's a tough question.
Ooh. All right, I've got 17 that I'll run through quick. No, if I had to pick one, I'm also picking from people we haven't talked a lot about. I'll give my vote to Porter Ingle, who
Ooh, good one.
was just such a standout for me at the beginning. I'm a sucker for an old curmudgeon in storytelling, and so I really liked him and his cooking of the stew. I struggled a little with his comic book, The Blade, just because it was so different, and it kind of took me a couple, and then now it's folded into phase three, and it matters, and so on. But I was so happy when Porter showed back up in Eye of Darkness that I was like, oh, I think he's much higher in my power ranking of Jedi than I might have believed. So a really fun one. And again, I honestly could list like 17 characters right now,
Yeah,
but I'll go
it's
with Porter.
how about you,
I
Jay?
love that. Well, of course, my first inclination is to say Avar Chris, and
I
I
knew that.
do,
Yes.
yes, and of course I do love Avar. But I'm gonna go off on a limb and say Bell Zettifar. I love his character. I love the fact that he has Ember, and it's funny because, Belle, Ember, and Porter, they're kind of all sort of, intertwined as well. But I don't know, I just really have enjoyed seeing the evolution of Belle as a Jedi and kind of where he's going to end up going from here. And I think that he's destined for great things. And I would have to say like a close third is definitely Keith Trennis for me.
Yeah. I've been drooling over the Stellan GS lightsaber in the background, Greg, because that was my favorite Jedi in this series, and I was really down when he died in Fallen Star. That I was just like, how all the characters that they had to, and the guy, we didn't get enough of him, and
You were
he was
very
held.
salty. Yes.
Yes, I still am about that.
And understandably so.
Yeah, holding against Claudia Gray for doing that too. No, I'm kidding. But the other one you brought up that I really like is Keith Turnus. I think she is incredibly cool. I like the journey she's had. I absolutely loved the moment in the phase 1 of Marvel's comics when Skier, he's been suffering from this debilitating disease that's limiting his connection to the Force, but he's going to charge off to fight the Nameless. And she says to him, I'll be your legacy. And then his response, this is not so much about her character, but as a moment, which is like, no, you're your own legacy, and kind of echoing what Yoda tells Luke in The Last Jedi. It's like, you are what, you grow beyond us, that's the burden of masters. And I liked how that was reflected. And so I really like what she's been able to do, beyond that. Well, let's get into the villains. Have you got a favorite villain? I mean, there's obviously Marchion Ro, who's the big bad behind all of this, but is that it? Or is there someone else that's been speaking to you?
Let me just backpedal to say I also have to shout out Nubs from Young Jedi Adventures because I have children upstairs who won't accept their father back into the family unless I shout out Young Jedi Adventures, which has been the first thing that my daughter is 4, and so she's just perfect for that and watches it all the time. And I was even watching Phantom Menace earlier today, and she walked in the room and said, "Oh, is that Master Yoda from her show?" Realized he traveled into other shows. So I mean, just a perfect Star Wars generation moment for that. I'll just say I really like the construction of the Nile as an organization and the way in which they have the levels and the naming of them, the storms and the strikes and the Tempest Runners. But I really liked across phase 1 how you had these kind of rival factions led by Lorna D and the other two rivals competing for Martians' affections and so on. So I think you hit it on the head earlier, Dennis, when you said, Tempest Runner really made Lorna D stand out. Maybe that character has now evolved out of that, but I love how deliciously awful she was in those early books and kind of unrepentant in so many ways. It's been surprising as the Nameless take on a larger and larger role and yet somehow remain totally terrifying. We know the books coming out in August and September, I believe both have Nameless on the cover and one in the title. So I think we're going to really get the next level of storytelling in phase 2 of wave 2 of phase 3. And it's really exciting to think about the taking on a bigger role. But all of that folded into the Nile organization is just really masterful storytelling. And I imagine it was a huge amount of work for them to map it all out and make sure everybody had their own kind of people to play with as it went on.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So well said. There's so many things about that. I'm just sitting here just nodding my head, And I have to go with Marchand Rowe. He is definitely, as you said, just deliciously evil. I love that. And I have to say, Mark Thompson, I've gone on record as saying is the best audiobook voice ever. I love Marchand Rowe in audiobook, and I could just listen to that character all day long. And, springboarding off of that, we were introduced to Marta Rowe, and of course she was this little kind of innocent Evereni that ends up being just completely neurotic and then eventually founding the Nihil. So, she's got to be in there for me, even as a villain. And she's just so neurotic, that it's like, oh my gosh. But yet that you almost buy into some of her justification, for doing some of the things that she does. And, of course, then there's Lorna D, which, oh man, I love me some Lorna D. And I'll tell you what, the biggest breakout character for me is got to be Diva Lompop. She's not a villain,
Yeah.
but yet she is. I love that character so much. But I'm
She's fun.
sticking with Marcion Rowe because, yeah, favorite villain for sure. But
Diva
Dennis,
was good. Where did she show up in War of the Bounty Hunters? I guess, but and I think is where we first saw her. But when I realized that's who we were talking about in Defy the Storm, and just got to go
so
find someone to eat. Did someone say someone to eat?
someone.
That line in there, that book was so fantastic. Yeah, Lorna is I think my favorite. I like Marcion. It's just that he hasn't, like I said, he just hasn't gotten as much attention as I want him to get. I want to get more from him, and I'm looking forward to whatever big confrontation we get with him and whoever it's going to be, whether it's Avar Chris, Elzar Man, Q Trinus, some collection of all of them later in phase 3 to wind this whole thing down. And the Nile, as you were pointing out, Greg, it was such a clever idea. They alternatively been described as space Vikings, marauders, pirates, and the like, and they've evolved so many different ways. I think that was especially clever from phase 2, having them be the descendants of this, path of the open hand and the path of the closed fist, the way the markings evolved, and ultimately ended up with this roving band of marauders that someone is trying to impose order on in order to achieve his own goals, which we still don't completely understand yet. But yeah, that's one of the strengths of the High Republic, is that our understanding of it keeps evolving, and they're feeding us a lot of stuff, but we still don't know exactly where this is going to go. Okay, well, we've already talked for a lot longer than I thought we would, and we still have so much more we could do. We're gonna have to have you back, Greg, to talk about more of the High Republic. Get you definitely back once we get another novel out here in the near future to talk about that. So yeah, thank you for joining us for this discussion. Again, just want to get a reminder out there for everybody about where they can reach you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you're right. I could talk for days and days, but we'll spare your listeners about that. So since I shouted it out a couple times, I do keep a blog which I write on fairly irregularly, but I like to think it's about quality, not quantity. And my entry on the High Republic and what live action could learn from it, I was really proud of, even if only 3 people looked at it. So I'll send a few people there. You can find that at ioncanon.com. So again, that's EYEONCANON, and that just links you to Substack. And there's some Star Wars content around there. I talk about movies and TV shows a little bit. Whenever I kind of get an idea, I put some thoughts down. So I'd love it if people checked me out there.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, then with that, just want to thank everyone for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stars and our discussion of the High Republic. We hope you've enjoyed the episode. And if you did, make sure you hit the subscribe button or the follow button, whatever you got on your podcatcher choice, and you'll get all of our future discussions on the High Republic. And we have several to go. I'd like to remind you can find our entire catalog of shows over on retrozap.com, which is home to the entire network of shows covering everything from the MCU to DC, Dune, Star Trek, and a whole lot more. As always, we greatly appreciate your 5-star ratings and reviews, whatever podcatcher that you use, if they support such things, especially if that's Apple Podcasts. And we love it when you share the show and your favorite episodes on social media with your friends. So, Jay, you want to remind everybody what those contacts are one more time?
Absolutely. So our social media outlets are Instagram, Facebook, and X at Podcast Stardust. And as Dennis was mentioning, you can pretty much find us everywhere. I have a lot of people that say, "Hey, where can I find your show?" And we are literally on every podcatcher that you can possibly think of. So Spotify, YouTube Music, head over to all of those, like and subscribe. We also have a Pinterest page with a bunch of boards. And then our Discord channel is a great place that you can hop onto and have some real-time chatter with us. So if you'd like to do that and you'd like to talk more High Republic, just hit that link in our show notes and it'll take you right to where you need to go. And there's tons of other rooms in the RetroZep Discord server as well. So as Dennis was mentioning, there's everything from the MCU, DC, Dune, Star Trek, all kinds of geekery fun going on. So chances are you'll have something fun to talk about. And then we also have a TeePublic store. So if you'd like to support the show by snagging one of 7 different show logo designs on everything from t-shirts and mugs to home goods and more, you can hit that link. And we are also still partnering with Saber Masters. So you'll have to check out sabermasters.com for all of the lightsaber goodness that they have over there. And if you do happen to pick anything up, make sure you put the code Stardust in at checkout, and that will earn you an extra $10 off. And it also helps to support the show. So check out the link in our show notes for that. So Dennis, I know it's kind of hard to pinpoint since we're so far out into the future, but what you got going on with other adventures? I guess we'll just leave it at that.
Right. So I'm not sure if we've finished season 5 of Star Trek Discovery or not. If we have not, then you can head over to the Retros App podcast feed and you'll find my wife Beth and I talking about that. Again, it's exclusive to the podcast feed. And yeah, we've got past episodes talking about Strange New Worlds, Picard, and Lower Decks as well. And the best place to find those is at retrozapp.com. Jay, it's early summer. What's going on in the world of cosplay?
Well, probably right now I'm taking a break because I know the spring and early summer has just been, as you've put it before, Dennis, cosplay geddon. And so there's been so much going on, but you can always catch my adventures at j.snipscosplay on Instagram, where you can find me as Ahsoka, 2 different versions of Hera, the fourth sister, my new Tahiri Vela Mandalorian that I debuted at Fan Expo Cleveland in April, as well as some versions of Leia, X-Wing pilots, and the like. So it's just the cosplay train just keeps on rolling. And again, you can find that at j.snipscosplay.
All right. This is the part of the show where I usually tell you what's coming up next. The answer to that is I don't know because we're recording this in April. So just be on the lookout for our next episode coming up in a few days. So thanks for listening to what I think is episode 740 Podcast Stardust, everyone. Until next time, may the Force